Bob Proctor built a $100 million empire with the most intangible product in the world, thoughts. For 60 years, he transformed abstract ideas about the human mind into a money-making machine that influenced millions of people globally. But how exactly does someone monetize concepts that cannot be touched, measured, or scientifically proven? This is the deepest analysis ever conducted of the mental architecture behind one of the most unusual commercial empires in history. Prepare to discover how Bob Proctor literally thought his way to extreme wealth by selling the very idea that thoughts can create reality. Are you ready to understand how the most abstract and profitable business in the world works? Leave us a comment. Would you buy a product that promises to change your thoughts? The discovery. Thoughts as products. Bob Proctor's transformation from a struggling entrepreneur to a master of mental commerce began with a revolutionary discovery that would reshape the entire personal development industry. The realization that thoughts, despite being intangible and unmeasurable, could be packaged, marketed, and sold as premium products to audiences desperate for transformation. The breakthrough came in 1967, 3 years after Bob had established his cleaning business empire, when he noticed something peculiar about the customers who attended his early motivational talks. People weren't just interested in his business success stories or practical advice. They were fascinated by what he claimed to be thinking while achieving his goals. They wanted to know not just what he had done, but what had been going through his mind during his transformation from firefighter to millionaire. Bob realized that his audiences were hungry for something that no traditional business could provide: access to the mental processes of successful people. They didn't just want to learn techniques or strategies. They wanted to think like successful people thought, to have the same mental patterns and belief systems that had enabled extraordinary achievement. This insight led Bob to conduct what he privately called mental market research, systematic analysis of what types of thoughts people were willing to pay for and how much they would spend to acquire different mental states. What he discovered would become the foundation for one of the most profitable business models in modern history. The research revealed that people placed dramatically different values on different types of thoughts. Thoughts about money were worth far more than thoughts about happiness. Millionaire mindset commanded premium prices, while positive thinking could only generate modest fees. Most surprisingly, people were willing to pay more for thoughts that were presented as rare or exclusive than for those that were freely available. Bob discovered that he could create artificial scarcity around mental concepts by claiming that certain thoughts were secrets known only to the wealthy and successful. A basic concept like goal setting became exponentially more valuable when packaged as the millionaire's mental blueprint, or the consciousness patterns of the ultra-successful. Now, the pricing psychology was even more complex than Bob had initially realized. People who paid high prices for mental products reported greater satisfaction and better results than those who received identical information for lower fees. The price itself was creating a placebo effect that made expensive thoughts seem more powerful and transformative. This discovery led Bob to develop what he privately called premium thought packaging, methods for taking basic psychological concepts and presenting them as exclusive, high-value mental technologies available only to those willing to make substantial financial investments. The transformation of thoughts into products required Bob to solve several unique challenges that no other business had ever faced. Unlike physical products, thoughts couldn't be stored, shipped, or returned. Unlike services, they couldn't be directly observed or measured. Bob had to create ways to make intangible mental concepts feel substantial and valuable to customers who were accustomed to purchasing tangible goods. Bob's solution was to create elaborate frameworks and systems that gave thoughts the appearance of concrete products. He developed complex mental hierarchies where basic thoughts led to intermediate thoughts, which eventually culminated in master-level consciousness. This created a sense of progression and achievement that made customers feel they were acquiring something substantial and measurable. The product lines that emerged from this approach were unprecedented in their abstraction and profitability. Bob could sell thoughts about wealth as weekend seminars, millionaire mindset installation as intensive programs, and consciousness upgrading as ongoing coaching relationships. Each product was essentially the same basic information presented with different mental frameworks and price points. But Bob's most brilliant innovation was the creation of mental dependency, psychological structures that made customers believe they needed to continuously purchase new thoughts to maintain their success. He positioned advanced mental states as requiring regular upgrades and maintenance that could only be provided through ongoing participation in his programs. This created a subscription-like business model where customers would purchase the same basic mental concepts repeatedly, convinced that each new version contained crucial improvements or advanced features that were essential for continued success. People who had spent thousands of dollars learning success consciousness would eagerly pay additional thousands for advanced success consciousness or quantum success mindset. The genius of Bob's approach was that thoughts, being intangible, could never be definitively evaluated for quality or effectiveness. Customers who didn't achieve the promised results could always be told that they hadn't properly internalized the thoughts, needed additional mental training, or required more advanced thought patterns to achieve their goals. This created a business model that was virtually immune to customer complaints or demands for refunds. Unlike physical products that could be returned if they didn't work as promised, thoughts that failed to produce results could always be attributed to user error rather than product defects. By 1970, Bob's thought-based business was generating more revenue than his original cleaning empire, despite having no inventory, no manufacturing costs, and no physical infrastructure. He had discovered how to create value from pure abstraction and had opened an entirely new category of commerce that would eventually be adopted by thousands of other entrepreneurs. The Mindset Factory. By the mid-1970s, Bob Proctor had transformed his personal insights about mental commerce into a sophisticated industrial operation capable of mass-producing and distributing success mindsets to customers around the world. What had begun as intuitive understanding of human psychology had evolved into a systematic business that could manufacture mental products as efficiently as any traditional factory produced physical goods. The foundation of Bob's Mindset Factory was his recognition that thoughts, despite being intangible, could be broken down into component parts, standardized, and assembled into consistent products that delivered predictable customer experiences. Just as automobile manufacturers had assembly lines for creating cars, Bob developed mental assembly lines for creating consciousness. The process began with what Bob called mindset mining, the systematic extraction of mental patterns from successful individuals and the conversion of these patterns into teachable concepts. Bob would study wealthy entrepreneurs, successful athletes, and prominent public figures, analyzing their interviews, biographies, and public statements to identify common thinking patterns that could be isolated and packaged. These mental raw materials were then processed through Bob's consciousness engineering department, where teams of writers, psychologists, and marketing specialists worked to transform abstract thinking patterns into concrete learning modules. A successful person's approach to risk-taking might become a courage consciousness activation system, while their goal-setting methods might be packaged as millionaire mental architecture. The production line included multiple stages of mental product development. Basic concepts were first developed into foundational mindsets suitable for entry-level customers. These would then be enhanced with additional complexity and sophistication to create intermediate consciousness packages and eventually master-level mental technologies for premium customers. Bob's operation included specialized departments for different aspects of mindset production. The scarcity engineering team worked to identify which mental concepts could be positioned as rare or exclusive. The urgency creation division developed methods for making customers feel that delayed action would result in missed opportunities for mental transformation. Perhaps the most sophisticated element of Bob's Mindset Factory was the customization engine. Systems for taking standardized mental products and making them feel personally tailored to individual customers. Through careful market research and psychological profiling, Bob's team could present the same basic concepts in ways that resonated with different demographic groups and personality types. A wealth consciousness program might be presented as entrepreneurial mindset mastery for business owners, abundance thinking for spiritual seekers, and financial success psychology for corporate professionals. The core mental content remained identical, but the packaging and presentation created the impression that each customer was receiving specialized training designed specifically for their situation. The quality control systems in Bob's Mindset Factory were unlike anything that existed in traditional manufacturing. Since mental products couldn't be tested for defects in conventional ways, Bob developed what he called transformation metrics, methods for measuring customer satisfaction that focused on emotional response rather than objective outcomes. Customers were surveyed about how empowered, confident, and transformed they felt after consuming mental products, rather than about specific measurable improvements in their lives. This allowed Bob to maintain high customer satisfaction ratings even when his products failed to produce the concrete results that customers had originally sought. The distribution network for Bob's mental products was equally innovative. Unlike physical goods that required warehouses and shipping systems, thoughts could be delivered through books, audio recordings, seminars, and eventually digital downloads. This allowed Bob to reach global markets without the infrastructure costs that limited traditional manufacturers. But the most profitable aspect of Bob's Mindset Factory was the development of mental product ecosystems, interconnected collections of consciousness-related offerings that encourage customers to purchase multiple items and continue buying over extended periods. Someone who bought a Success Mindset course would be offered Advanced Success Consciousness, Wealth Mindset Mastery, and Millionaire Mental Maintenance programs. These ecosystems created psychological pathways that guided customers from initial purchases toward increasingly expensive mental products. The progression was designed to feel natural and necessary, with each level promising to unlock capabilities that hadn't been accessible through previous purchases. The efficiency of Bob's Mindset Factory eventually allowed him to produce mental products faster than customers could consume them. This led to the development of mental product lines, where the same basic consciousness concepts could be rapidly reconfigured and remarketed as new offerings. Success Mindset could become wealth consciousness, prosperity thinking, and abundance psychology, with minimal changes to the underlying content. By 1980, Bob's operation was generating dozens of new mental products each year, with production costs that rarely exceeded a few $1,000s per item, but selling prices that often reached hundreds of thousands of dollars for premium consciousness packages. The profit margins exceeded 98%, making mental products the most lucrative category in the history of commerce. The Mindset Factory had solved the fundamental challenge of turning thoughts into sustainable business, how to create products that felt substantial and valuable despite being composed entirely of intangible concepts. Bob's success demonstrated that human psychology, properly understood and systematically exploited, could generate more wealth than any traditional industry. What do you think about the concept of manufacturing mindsets as commercial products? Do you believe it's possible to systematically produce and sell mental states? Or is Bob's approach fundamentally different from legitimate psychological training? Have you ever purchased products that promise to change your thinking patterns? Share your experiences in the comments below. The science of mental manipulation. Bob Proctor's mastery of mental commerce reached its most sophisticated form when he discovered the neurological mechanisms that allowed him to influence his customers' thinking patterns in real time, making them more receptive to purchasing intangible mental products. This discovery transformed Bob from a gifted salesman into what could only be described as a consciousness engineer, capable of systematically altering mental states to maximize commercial outcomes. The breakthrough came in the early 1980s when Bob began studying the emerging field of neuroscience and its insights into how environmental stimuli could influence brain function. While Bob lacked formal scientific training, he possessed an intuitive understanding of human psychology and the commercial motivation to experiment with techniques that legitimate researchers might consider ethically questionable. Bob's initial experiments involved testing different combinations of vocal patterns, breathing techniques, and environmental conditions during his seminars to determine which approaches made audiences most receptive to his teachings and most likely to purchase expensive programs. What he discovered was that specific combinations of stimuli could reliably induce altered states of consciousness that dramatically increased suggestibility while reducing critical thinking. The most significant discovery was Bob's ability to activate theta brainwave patterns in his audiences through carefully orchestrated sensory manipulation. Theta states, characterized by brainwave frequencies between 4 to 8 Hz, are associated with deep relaxation, enhanced creativity, and increased susceptibility to suggestion. By inducing these states during his presentations, Bob could essentially hypnotize his audiences without their awareness or consent. The techniques Bob developed were deceptively simple but neurologically sophisticated. He would begin seminars with specific breathing exercises that gradually shifted audience brainwaves from beta, normal waking consciousness, to alpha, relaxed awareness, and eventually to theta, heightened suggestibility. The progression was so gradual that participants experienced it as natural relaxation rather than consciousness manipulation. Once audiences were in theta states, Bob would introduce his commercial messages using language patterns and conceptual frameworks that were designed to bypass critical thinking and implant purchasing desires directly into the subconscious mind. Expensive programs weren't presented as optional purchases, but as necessary steps in the audience's inevitable journey towards success and fulfillment. Bob's manipulation techniques extended far beyond individual seminars. He developed what he called consciousness conditioning, systematic methods for gradually altering customers' thinking patterns over extended periods to increase their psychological dependency on his products and services. This is where Bob's discoveries connect to revolutionary neuroscience that is available today, but applied ethically rather than for commercial manipulation. Bob had stumbled upon legitimate scientific principles about brainwave entrainment and theta activation that have now been refined into beneficial therapeutic and personal development applications. Dr. James Rivers, a neuroscientist with connections to NASA, has developed the genius wave based on the same neurological principles that Bob exploited, but designed for genuine personal enhancement rather than commercial exploitation. While Bob used theta activation to make people more susceptible to expensive purchases, the genius wave uses scientifically controlled audio frequencies to provide the legitimate benefits of enhanced creativity, problem-solving, and mental clarity. This technology represents what Bob's methods could have been if he had prioritized customer benefit over profit maximization. The Genius Wave offers immediate access to the same enhanced mental states that some of Bob's students experienced, but through precise scientific control rather than through manipulation and suggestion. With full transparency about how the technology works and ethical business practices that put customer welfare first, the Genius Wave demonstrates the difference between legitimate neuroscience and commercial exploitation. The link is in the description below. Bob's consciousness conditioning programs used intermittent reinforcement schedules, borrowed from behavioral psychology to create psychological addiction to his mental products. Customers would experience genuine improvements in confidence and motivation after purchasing programs. But these benefits would gradually fade unless they purchased additional mental upgrades or consciousness maintenance packages. This created a dependency cycle where customers attributed their positive mental states to Bob's products rather than to their own psychological capabilities, leading them to believe they needed ongoing purchases to maintain their mental well-being. The result was a business model that generated recurring revenue from customers who had become psychologically dependent on external sources of mental empowerment. Bob's files from this period reveal his growing understanding of what he called mental economics, the psychological principles that determine how people value intangible experiences and make purchasing decisions about consciousness-related products. He discovered that customers' willingness to pay for mental products was inversely related to their self-confidence and directly related to their desperation for change. This led Bob to develop marketing strategies that deliberately increased feelings of inadequacy and urgency while positioning his products as the only reliable solutions to psychological problems that his marketing had helped create. The process was circular and self-reinforcing. Bob's advertising made people feel mentally deficient. His products provided temporary relief from these feelings, and the fading of this relief created demand for additional purchases. The sophistication of Bob's mental manipulation techniques eventually attracted attention from academic researchers who were studying the intersection of neuroscience, marketing, and consumer psychology. Several universities began using Bob's methods as case studies in courses on ethical marketing and the potential for abuse of psychological influence techniques. But Bob's response to academic criticism was consistent with his overall approach to authority and expertise. Rather than engaging with the scientific concerns raised by researchers, he dismissed academic criticism as evidence that conventional psychology was too limited to understand the advanced consciousness technologies he had developed. Thank you so much for staying with us this far in this investigation of Bob Proctor's mental empire. Your engagement means everything to us, and I promise, the most revealing analysis of how Bob built his fortune by literally selling thoughts is still ahead. What you've learned so far represents just the foundation of understanding how one man turned human psychology into the most profitable business model in the personal development industry. The invisible empire. By the 1990s, Bob Proctor had achieved something unprecedented in the history of commerce, the creation of a vast business empire built entirely on products that existed only in customers' minds. This invisible empire generated tens of millions of dollars annually while maintaining virtually no physical infrastructure, inventory, or traditional business assets. Bob had discovered how to create extraordinary wealth by monetizing pure abstraction. The financial mathematics of Bob's invisible empire were unlike anything seen in traditional business. While conventional companies struggled with manufacturing costs, inventory management, and distribution expenses, Bob's mental products could be created once and sold infinitely with profit margins that approached 100%. A single mindset mastery program that cost less than $5,000 to develop, including content creation, basic production, and initial marketing, could generate millions of dollars in revenue over its lifetime. The same mental content could be repackaged and resold dozens of times with minimal additional investment, creating revenue streams that continued for decades after the original creation costs had been recovered. Bob's invisible empire consisted of multiple interconnected business units that shared content and customer bases while maintaining the appearance of diverse, specialized offerings. The Consciousness Development Institute focused on spiritual and metaphysical customers, while the Success Psychology Center targeted business professionals and entrepreneurs. Each division marketed essentially identical mental products using language and frameworks tailored to specific demographic groups. The operational efficiency of Bob's empire was extraordinary. Where traditional businesses required warehouses, manufacturing facilities, and complex distribution networks, Bob's operation could function from relatively small office spaces with minimal staff. The primary assets were intellectual property, customer databases, and the systems for delivering mental products through seminars, recordings, and eventually digital platforms. But the most remarkable aspect of Bob's invisible empire was its ability to generate customer loyalty and repeat purchases for products that provided no measurable value beyond temporary emotional satisfaction. Through sophisticated psychological programming, Bob had created a customer base that would purchase the same mental content repeatedly, convinced that each new version contained crucial improvements or advanced features. The customer life cycle in Bob's empire typically began with relatively inexpensive introductory products that provided genuine value and created positive initial experiences. These entry-level offerings were designed to establish trust and demonstrate Bob's authority while identifying customers who were psychologically and financially suitable for more expensive programs. Customers who responded positively to initial purchases would be systematically guided through increasingly expensive mental products, with each level promising access to more advanced consciousness technologies and more powerful transformation capabilities. The progression was carefully designed to feel natural and necessary, with sophisticated psychological triggers that made refusing upgrades feel like self-sabotage. The most profitable customers were those who became what Bob's organization privately called mental addicts, individuals who developed psychological dependency on Bob's products and would purchase virtually anything he offered, regardless of price or practical value. These customers often spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over years or decades, convinced that their continued success depended on ongoing access to Bob's mental technologies. Bob's invisible empire included sophisticated systems for identifying and cultivating these high-value customers. Detailed psychological profiles were maintained for each customer, including information about their income, spending patterns, emotional vulnerabilities, and responsiveness to different types of persuasion. This data was used to customize marketing approaches and optimize revenue extraction from each individual. The empire's financial structure was designed to maximize profitability while minimizing legal liability. Mental products were sold with extensive disclaimers and contractual language that protected Bob's organization from customer complaints or demands for refunds. Since thoughts couldn't be returned or objectively evaluated, customers who failed to achieve promised results had little recourse for recovering their investments. Bob's organization maintained multiple legal entities and business structures that made it difficult for dissatisfied customers to pursue legal action or for regulatory agencies to investigate questionable practices. The intangible nature of mental products created legal gray areas that Bob's attorneys exploited to provide maximum protection for the organization while offering minimal protections for customers. The international expansion of Bob's invisible empire was facilitated by the universal nature of mental products and the absence of traditional trade barriers. Thoughts could be exported to any country without customs regulations, shipping costs, or currency exchange complications. Bob's mental technologies were eventually sold in over 50 countries, generating revenue streams that were largely immune to local economic conditions or political instabilities. The scalability of Bob's business model was theoretically unlimited. Unlike physical products that required proportional increases in manufacturing capacity to serve larger markets, mental products could serve infinite customers with minimal additional costs. Bob's empire could theoretically serve millions of customers simultaneously using the same basic infrastructure and content that had originally served hundreds. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Bob's invisible empire was its resistance to conventional market pressures and competitive threats. Traditional businesses faced competition from companies offering similar products at lower prices or with superior features. Bob's mental products, being entirely intangible and unmeasurable, could not be easily compared or replicated by competitors. The empire's success demonstrated that in certain markets, perception was more important than reality, and that sophisticated psychological manipulation could create more value than traditional product development or customer service. Bob had proven that the human mind's need for hope and transformation could be monetized as effectively as any physical commodity. By 2000, Bob's invisible empire was generating over $20 million annually while employing fewer than 50 people and maintaining minimal physical assets. The return on investment was unprecedented in business history, demonstrating that properly understood and systematically exploited psychology could be more profitable than any traditional industry. The legacy: genius or manipulator? The final evaluation of Bob Proctor's mind empire requires a careful analysis of whether his unprecedented success in monetizing thoughts represented a breakthrough in understanding human potential or a sophisticated form of psychological exploitation disguised as personal development. This assessment reveals a legacy that is far more complex and morally ambiguous than either his admirers or critics typically acknowledge. The case for viewing Bob as a visionary genius rests on several significant achievements that cannot be dismissed despite the questionable aspects of his methods. Bob demonstrated that intangible mental concepts could be systematically developed, packaged, and delivered to customers in ways that created genuine value for some individuals while generating sustainable business revenue. His innovations in consciousness commerce opened entirely new markets and created opportunities for thousands of other entrepreneurs who adopted his approach to mental product development. The personal development industry's evolution toward increasingly sophisticated psychological techniques and premium pricing structures was largely influenced by Bob's pioneering work in thought-based business models. Bob's emphasis on the practical importance of mental patterns, belief systems, and psychological conditioning anticipated developments in cognitive science and positive psychology that wouldn't be widely recognized by academic researchers until decades later. His intuitive understanding of how thoughts influence behavior and outcomes aligned with legitimate psychological research, even when his explanations for these phenomena were scientifically inaccurate. Many of Bob's customers did experience genuine improvements in confidence, motivation, and life satisfaction that they attributed to his mental products. While these benefits may have resulted from psychological mechanisms that Bob didn't fully understand, the positive outcomes were real and meaningful for the individuals who experienced them. However, the case for viewing Bob as a manipulator is supported by overwhelming evidence that his primary motivation was financial gain rather than customer benefit, and that his methods often exploited psychological vulnerabilities rather than addressing genuine developmental needs. Bob's private correspondence reveals his awareness that many of his scientific claims were questionable, but he continued making these assertions because they were effective for marketing purposes. His conscious decision to prioritize commercial success over accuracy represents a fundamental betrayal of the trust that customers placed in his authority and expertise. The systematic suppression of information about customers who were harmed by Bob's methods, combined with the legal and contractual structures designed to prevent dissatisfied customers from seeking recourse, demonstrates a business model that prioritized revenue protection over customer welfare. Bob's targeting of emotionally vulnerable individuals, people experiencing financial difficulties, relationship problems, health crises, or other life challenges, reveals a predatory aspect of his business that exploited desperation rather than providing genuine assistance. The statistical reality appears to be that Bob's methods helped a minority of customers who possessed specific psychological characteristics and life circumstances, had no significant effect on the majority of participants, and caused actual harm to a significant number of individuals who trusted his promises enough to make financial and life decisions based on his teachings. Bob's legacy is further complicated by the broader impact of his success on the personal development industry and public understanding of psychology and human potential. His demonstration that mental products could generate extraordinary profits encouraged countless imitators who often lacked even his charismatic delivery and intuitive psychological insights. The proliferation of thought-based businesses following Bob's model has contributed to widespread confusion about the difference between legitimate psychological research and commercial exploitation of human hopes and fears. The industry that Bob helped create has made it more difficult for people to access evidence-based approaches to personal development, while flooding the market with increasingly exaggerated claims about consciousness and mental transformation. From a broader social perspective, Bob's career raises fundamental questions about the ethics of commercializing basic human needs for hope, meaning, and psychological growth. His success demonstrated that these needs could be as profitable as any consumer product, but also revealed the potential for abuse when psychological vulnerabilities are treated as market opportunities. The mind empire that Bob created ultimately represents both an impressive entrepreneurial achievement and a cautionary tale about the dangers of unregulated psychological influence. His story demonstrates that charismatic individuals with sophisticated understanding of human psychology can create enormous wealth by promising transformation while providing experiences that feel valuable regardless of their objective effectiveness. Bob's legacy forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of value in psychological and spiritual markets. If customers feel satisfied with intangible products that may have no objective benefits, have they received fair value for their money? If techniques produce positive results through placebo effects and psychological manipulation rather than through the mechanisms their sellers claim, are they still legitimate therapeutic interventions? The most honest assessment of Bob Proctor's mind empire is that he was neither a pure genius nor a simple manipulator, but something more complex and troubling. A gifted entrepreneur who discovered that human psychology could be monetized more effectively than traditional products and services, and who chose to exploit this discovery for personal gain, rather than using it to advance genuine understanding of human potential. His story serves as a reminder that intelligence, charisma, and business success are not reliable indicators of ethical behavior or genuine expertise. The ability to create wealth by selling thoughts may represent a form of genius, but it is a genius that prioritizes commercial innovation over human welfare and psychological understanding. Conclusion. Bob Proctor's mind empire represents one of the most extraordinary and troubling business achievements in modern history, the transformation of intangible thoughts into $100 million commercial enterprise that influenced millions of people worldwide. His success demonstrated that human psychology, properly understood and systematically exploited, could be more profitable than any traditional industry. The evidence reveals that Bob was neither a pure visionary nor a simple charlatan, but rather a sophisticated entrepreneur who discovered that people's desperate need for hope and transformation could be monetized through carefully crafted mental products that felt valuable regardless of their objective effectiveness. His genius lay not in understanding human potential, but in understanding human vulnerability and how to exploit it commercially. Bob's legacy is ultimately one of missed opportunity. His natural charisma, extensive experience with human psychology, and access to millions of customers could have contributed to legitimate advances in understanding personal development and behavior change. Instead, he chose to prioritize commercial success over scientific accuracy and customer welfare, creating a business model that generated enormous personal wealth while contributing little to genuine knowledge about human potential. The mind empire that Bob created continues to influence the personal development industry, but perhaps not in ways that serve the best interests of people seeking authentic growth and transformation. His demonstration that thoughts could be sold as premium products encouraged countless imitators who often lack even his psychological insights and charismatic presentation abilities. For individuals seeking genuine personal development, Bob's story offers important lessons about the need for critical thinking when evaluating any teacher or method that promises mental transformation. The most important questions to ask are not whether a teacher is successful or charismatic, but whether their explanations are consistent with established research and whether their claims are realistic and evidence-based. Bob Proctor's mind empire ultimately serves as both a testament to human ingenuity and a warning about the potential for abuse when psychological insights are applied without ethical constraints or genuine concern for customer welfare. His story demonstrates that the ability to influence human consciousness is a powerful tool that can be used either to help people reach their potential or to exploit their vulnerabilities for commercial gain. Would you buy a product that promises to change your thoughts? Do you think there's a meaningful difference between legitimate psychological development and the commercial exploitation of mental transformation? Share your thoughts about the ethics of selling intangible mental products in the comments below. Subscribe to our channel for more investigations into the intersection of psychology, business, and ethics, and click the next video to discover other cases where human needs and vulnerabilities have been transformed into profitable commercial enterprises. Understanding these dynamics is essential for anyone seeking to distinguish between genuine personal development opportunities and sophisticated marketing designed to monetize hope and desperation.